You don't need to change your life right now. You need to awaken within it. That's what changes everything. Most people believe that the path to transformation begins in the external world. New habits, new goals, new directions. But the real turning point isn't in what you do. It's in how you awaken to what is already happening. Because the life you're living today isn't a mistake. It's a mirror, a precise reflection of your current state of consciousness. Nothing is happening to you by chance. Everything is intertwined with what vibrates within, even if you haven't realized it yet. Every recurring emotion, every pattern that keeps returning, every situation that seems beyond your control, is there for a reason, to reveal the invisible code of your consciousness. And once you access this code, everything changes. Not because the world changes, but because you change within it. Today you'll understand that quantum entanglement doesn't only happen between particles. It happens between you and everything that hasn't yet awakened inside you. Your consciousness is the point of connection between the visible and the invisible. And the more you awaken, the more the universe reveals itself as a field of infinite possibilities, shaped not by force, but by your perception. This is the true code of reality, and it starts now. In quantum physics, entanglement is a phenomenon that puzzles even the most skeptical scientists. Two particles, even when separated by immeasurable distances, remain connected, instantly responding to each other's movements. This mystery, which defies linear logic, already reveals something revolutionary. Separation is an illusion. But what if this principle didn't apply only to particles, but also to states of consciousness? What if everything you feel, think, and observe was secretly entangled with the events of your life? What we call reality is actually a field of potential information, collapsed by your state of consciousness. This means your perception, the way you observe, interpret, and vibrate, is the code that activates or deactivates experiences in your field. This code is invisible, but incredibly powerful, and it's being transmitted all the time, even if you're unaware of it. That's why we can say that consciousness is the true quantum code. It's the link between the inner world and the outer universe. Nothing exists in isolation. You are entangled with what you allow to exist within. Recurring thoughts, misunderstood emotions, silent beliefs, all of it emits vibrational signals that resonate with situations, people, and experiences. This isn't magic, it's mind science in its purest form. Every time you believe in something with intensity, your consciousness collapses that possibility within the quantum field. When you constantly feel fear, for example, your vibration connects to realities compatible with that state. But when you cultivate elevated states, such as presence, acceptance, or love, you connect to entirely different possibilities and outcomes. There's something even deeper here. It's not just what you think that matters, but how aware you are of what you think. The simple act of observing a thought without getting lost in it already shifts your frequency. This is the power of the observer. This is what quantum physics confirms. Reality changes when it is observed. In spirituality, we call this presence. When you bring awareness to something, without judgment, without resistance, it begins to dissolve, integrate, and transform. Because everything unconscious gains power in the dark, and everything illuminated by your awareness returns to its natural state of balance. Everything is connected, not just through energy, but through the way you perceive and interpret energy. You are not separate from what you experience. You are an active part of the equation. Your state of consciousness is the invisible code shaping everything around you. That's why awakening is not a spiritual luxury. It's an urgent calling, an invitation to take vibrational responsibility for what you're emitting. And the more you understand that everything is entangled, consciousness, emotion, vibration, and reality, the more you access a new kind of power. Not a power of control, but of alignment. Not a power that forces, but one that reveals. Have you ever noticed how certain patterns seem to keep showing up in your life? As if the same situations, people, or emotions return wearing different clothes, but carrying the same old frequency? That's not coincidence. It's not bad luck either. What you're experiencing is a direct manifestation of what hasn't yet awakened within you. In the quantum field of consciousness, nothing is separate. Everything is interconnected, not just by invisible threads of energy, but by blind spots in your awareness. Every repeated experience, every challenging relationship, every cycle that seems to close without really ending, is a reflection of your own vibrational field, pointing to a part of you that is still asleep. The external world isn't punishing you. It's collapsing precisely what needs to be seen, understood, and integrated. It's as if the universe is saying, with every experience, hey, this is still inside you, and it's asking for consciousness. You are entangled with what you deny, resist, or avoid within yourself. And that entanglement won't dissolve until you look at it with presence. Because the universe isn't linear, it's mirrored. And everything you reject internally, it reflects externally as an opportunity for integration. Toxic relationships, recurring frustrations, repressed emotions, quiet fears, all of it is serving a greater purpose. They're not there to defeat you, they're there to awaken you. Because as long as parts of you remain unconscious, reality will continue echoing them until you recognize the origin, not just the symptom. Nothing is separate from you. The world that affects you is revealing the exact point that still needs awareness. That means you can stop fighting life and start dialoguing with it. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Begin asking, what is this trying to show me? That simple shift in perspective changes your entire field. Quantum entanglement on this level isn't a connection between particles. It's a connection between you and the parts of you that haven't yet awakened to the light of awareness. And as long as those parts remain in the dark, they'll keep manifesting as echoes in the outer world. Nothing is random. Everything vibrates with what you are. But here's the key. You are not just what you consciously feel. You are also what was conditioned, repressed, and forgotten. That's why awakening is not about creating a new version of yourself. It's about remembering who you were before you got lost in the mind's conditioning and unhealed wounds. Consciousness is the portal, and everything that comes to you is trying to push you through it, not to punish you, but to reveal you. Every discomfort is an invitation. Every repetition is a compass, and every challenging experience is a chance to look at yourself with more presence, more love, and more truth. You are entangled with everything that vibrates within your unconscious. But the moment you bring conscious awareness to it, the entanglement dissolves. Not because reality changed, but because you finally awakened to what it was always trying to show you. You were conditioned to believe that changing your life requires effort, control, and resistance. From an early age, we were taught that everything valuable can only be earned through struggle, that you must battle negative thoughts, resist heavy emotions, force your mind to stay positive. But that approach, while it may seem active, is rooted in fear. Fear of feeling, fear of surrendering, fear of not being in control. But the universe doesn't respond to force, it responds to vibration, and vibration isn't something you impose, it's something you allow. The external world is only a mirror of your internal frequency. When you try to change what's outside without first shifting what vibrates within, you're merely trying to reshape the reflection without touching the mirror. You get exhausted, frustrated, lost in cycles of repetition. Because the source of your reality is not the world, it's your consciousness. That's why you can change everything around you, but if you keep vibrating the same emotions, the same thoughts, the same unconscious beliefs, the quantum field will continue collapsing versions of reality that match what you still carry inside. The key to transformation is not control, it's observation. When you observe a thought with presence, without judgment, it transmutes. When you welcome an emotion without trying to change or suppress it, it dissolves. That's because the light of consciousness instantly alters the frequency of what it touches. Quantum physics shows us that the mere act of observing a particle changes its behavior. This isn't metaphor, it's literal. The observer influences the observed phenomenon. And if this applies to subatomic particles, it also applies to the thoughts and emotions you either embrace or reject every day. Consciousness expands when you move from reactivity into presence. When you stop wishing things were different and start understanding what they're here to reveal. This doesn't mean passivity, it means vibrational wisdom. It's a radical shift. From doing to being, from fighting to observing, from controlling to understanding. The more your consciousness expands, the quieter the need to change the world by force becomes. You start to see that as you shift, the world responds with new possibilities. Not by effort, but by resonance. Expansion doesn't happen because you decide to be better. It happens when you allow yourself to be true. When you stop resisting pain, fear, discomfort, and instead inhabit them with presence. That's where alchemy begins. What was once shadow becomes light. What was once heavy dissolves. What once felt like a prison reveals itself as a lesson. You're not here to control reality. You're here to awaken within it. And the more conscious you become, the less resistance you offer. Because you understand that everything has a place in your awakening process. Even what you thought needed to change. Reality doesn't respond to force, it responds to frequency. And your frequency shifts when you change the way you observe, feel, and embrace what you experience. In the end, it's not the world that must change. It's you who must remember who you truly are. The consciousness that observes, integrates, and transforms everything with the simple presence of being. The self that observes and the world that responds. There's a silent illusion that fuels much of human suffering. The belief that we're separate from the reality we live in, that there is me here and the world out there, that events strike us randomly, that people act without connection to our vibration, that we're victims of something external, uncontrollable, indifferent to our awareness. But the deeper you go within, the clearer it becomes. There is no outside. There is no two. Everything is experience happening in resonance with your inner state. What seems separate is just an illusion created by the rational mind, which sees everything in fragments, categories, contrasts. This illusion is useful for the human experience. It creates time, space, movement, but it is not the ultimate truth. At the core, what we call the world is an extension of the observer. Consciousness is not locked inside the body. It radiates, projects, connects. And the quantum field responds to that projection with absolute precision, like a multi-dimensional mirror reflecting not just what you think, but what you are, vibrationally. The I that observes is the true creative center of reality, but that I is not the ego. The ego observes with fear, judgment, urgency. It reacts, it analyzes, it compares. The true observer is silent, present, limitless. It is your higher self, and it's always been there, even when you thought you were lost. The higher self isn't far. It's the quiet witness that has always been with you. It's just been drowned out by the noise of the ego. When you step into this state of presence, something magical happens. Situations no longer feel random. Synchronicities increase. Answers arrive before questions are even formed. And the world begins to behave like an extension of your own energy. Not because you're controlling everything, but because you've become conscious. This is the turning point. You leave the victim narrative. Why is this happening to me? And enter the role of the awakened observer. What is this showing me about myself? And when that question becomes your lens, the universe shifts roles. It ceases to be a threat and becomes a teacher. The world responds to the state of the observer. When the observer is contracted, fearful, the reality reflects more chaos. When the observer is present, aware, open, reality reorganizes with more flow. This isn't a mystical belief. It's a vibrational principle. Life isn't happening against you. It's happening through you. Duality, though ultimately illusory, is part of the human experience. We need it to understand, to feel, to evolve. But it's not the final destination. It's the path. The destination is reintegration. When you realize that everything you see, feel, and experience is connected to the central point of your awareness, that there's no separation between what you are and what you live. There is only one field mirroring your presence or your absence in it. The eye that observes is the link between the human and the divine. Within it lies the power of healing, of manifestation, of reconnection. You don't need to search for this eye out there. It's already here, behind every breath, every thought, every emotion. Waiting for the moment when you silence the mind just enough to see it, and remember that you were never separate from anything. Awakening consciousness is not an extraordinary event. It doesn't require lights, rituals, or complex techniques. True expansion happens in the ordinary, in the silence of a moment, when instead of reacting, you simply observe. Awakening is less about doing and more about seeing. Seeing what once went unnoticed. Seeing what was always there, but was covered by automatic habits, impulsive reactions, and unconscious patterns. A sleep consciousness shows up when we live on autopilot, when we feel without really feeling, when we repeat thoughts and behaviors without questioning them, when we go through challenging situations and seek only to escape, instead of looking at what's being revealed. And curiously, awakening often begins in discomfort, not because suffering is necessary, but because it forces us to stop. And in that pause, something opens, something reveals itself. Awakening doesn't mean eliminating the patterns that have accompanied you for years. It means bringing them into the light, acknowledging them with presence, without judgment. That alone is already half the transformation. Because what repeats inside you is seeking exactly that, to be seen. And when it's seen, it begins to dissolve. That's where conscious observation becomes a true act of inner alchemy. Instead of resisting fear, you observe it. Instead of fighting anxiety, you hold space for it. Instead of trying to control anger, you allow yourself to feel it with presence. This may seem contradictory to the mind, which was trained to survive by suppressing and reacting. But to consciousness, there is no other path to liberation but the neutral and loving gaze. The mind screams for you to react. Consciousness whispers for you to observe. And it's in that silence that the portal to awakening lives. At the moment an emotional trigger arises, you have a choice: to follow the impulse or to create space. When you choose to create space, even for a few seconds, something changes. You are no longer the character trapped in the storyline. You become the lucid observer, the point of awareness that sees the story unfold, and therefore has the power to change it. The practice of awakening begins like this: recognizing patterns, bringing presence to them, feeling what they carry without trying to fix anything. It's the opposite of what the mind has been trained to do, but it's exactly what breaks the cycle and rewrites your frequency. Instead of resisting, I observe. Instead of fighting, I awaken. And in that space between stimulus and response, the new is born, not as an imposition, but as a natural consequence of consciousness expanding. You begin to realize that the patterns you saw as monsters were actually abandoned parts of you, waiting to be embraced. You understand that feeling is safe, that looking is liberating, that awakening is remembering who you were before the conditioning. The more you allow this presence, the more the quantum field responds. External situations begin to shift effortlessly, not because you're forcing change, but because what was sustaining them, your unconscious vibration, is no longer active. What was reactive becomes creative. What was heavy becomes wisdom. What was pain becomes a portal. That's awakening, returning to inhabit your experience with consciousness, and in doing so you transform everything, not through control, but through presence. For a long time, the subconscious was treated as an invisible enemy, a dark territory filled with traumas, repressed memories, limiting patterns, something to be defeated or reprogrammed by force. But that view arises from separation, a mindset that still sees the mind as a battle between light and shadow, right and wrong, positive and negative. But as consciousness awakens, that perspective dissolves. What once looked like self-sabotage is now recognized as a neutral field of pure information, a vibrational repository that only repeats what hasn't yet been observed with true attention. The subconscious is not against you. It simply stores everything you haven't been conscious enough to transform. In practice, it acts like a faithful mirror. It manifests patterns based on what you've learned, experienced, felt, and absorbed, even unconsciously. It doesn't judge, analyze, or debate. It simply vibrates what's been recorded. And that's why liberation doesn't come through force. It comes through the light of awareness, touching what was once in the dark. You don't need to force your liberation. You just need to bring light to what's still hidden. Every time you sit with a difficult emotion, every time you feel without suppressing, every time you notice yourself reacting and choose to breathe instead of attacking, you are reprogramming the subconscious, not intellectually, but vibrationally. Because what transforms a pattern is not resistance, it's consciousness. Imagine the subconscious as a dark room. Everything that's been thrown there throughout your life still exists, even if you can't see it. And it's precisely because you don't see it that it keeps operating silently, creating automatic reactions, blockages, and self-sabotage. But as the light of consciousness enters that room, the shapes begin to reveal themselves. You start to clearly see what you once only felt as vague discomfort. And in that moment, something powerful happens. The energy begins to move. The light of consciousness does not judge. It doesn't say what's right or wrong. It simply reveals. And in that revelation lies healing. Because what is truly seen becomes integrated. What is lovingly welcomed dissolves. What is fully felt, without fear, transforms. The subconscious doesn't need to be defeated. It needs to be heard. It holds the keys to all the repeating patterns in your life. And when you access those keys with presence, you realize that what you called a problem was actually just a call for attention. A silent invitation from your psyche to come home, to return to yourself. When consciousness awakens, it doesn't fight the mind. It doesn't battle the emotions. It observes, it recognizes, it illuminates. And in that simple act, everything begins to realign. Inner chaos gives way to clarity. Fear transforms into trust. Rigidity softens into flow. That's why true freedom isn't about controlling thoughts or forcing positivity. It's about becoming aware of what was once automatic, about embracing what was once avoided, about looking with compassion at what the mind learned to hide. The subconscious is not your enemy. It's your map, a record of everything that still needs to be felt, understood, and released. And consciousness is the key that decodes that map. The more you awaken, the more the subconscious opens, and the freer you become. Not because something was fixed, but because everything was finally seen. We've reached the end of our journey, but maybe the true beginning is just starting within you. Today, you access something beyond the rational mind. You touch the possibility that everything you live is entangled with your state of consciousness. That reality doesn't need to be controlled. It only needs to be observed with presence. And that awakening is not an effort to become something new, but a silent remembering of what you already are. The code of entanglement isn't out there. It's in the way you awaken to what already is. And to help integrate this, here's a simple, powerful invitation. For the next 24 hours, whenever a discomfort arises, repeat silently, I am here to observe and awaken, not to react. And observe what changes, because when you change, the world changes with you. And when you awaken, the entire universe responds. Your consciousness is the code that reprograms reality. And now, it is activated.